Hey guys, tonight we're going to drift away to the quiet shores of Japan's most peculiar islands, a scattering of tiny fishing communities where the feline population has, shall we say, rather spectacularly overtaken the human one. We're going to explore the gentle and surprisingly deep history of how these cat islands came to be. We'll trace the journey of the cat from a revered protector of ancient wisdom to a furry, purring predictor of storms and fish, and finally, to the star of 1,000 tourist photographs. It's a story that's far more soothing and a little stranger than you might imagine. And let's be honest, if you were actually transported back to the start of this story, you probably wouldn't survive the voyage. You'd be subsisting on a delightful diet of hardtack and lukewarm water, and that's if you didn't succumb to a simple infection first. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. As always, I'd love to see where you're all tuning in from tonight, so drop your city or country, and the local time in the comments below. It's always fascinating to see this little community of ours spread across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your journey begins not on a bustling modern island crowded with tourists and cats, but in the quiet hold of a ship centuries ago. The air is thick with the scent of salt, damp wood, and something else, the faint, musty smell of precious cargo. Hand-copied scrolls of Buddhist scripture, making their slow way from the Asian mainland to the shores of Japan. You find a place to settle among the crates and bundled silks, the rhythmic creak and groan of the ship's timbers a constant lulling groan. This isn't a passenger vessel. It's a vessel of cultural transmission, a floating library carrying priceless knowledge across the often treacherous waters of the Korea Strait. The most important items on board are not the silks or the ceramics, but the sutras. These are delicate rolls of paper and silk, covered in thousands of intricate, hand-brushed characters, each one a universe of meaning. To lose even one scroll to the elements or to vermin would be a catastrophic failure. And that is why you are not the only silent observer in the dim light. In the corner, a pair of luminous green eyes blink open slowly. They belong to the ship's most important guardian, a small lithe creature of sand-colored fur with tabby stripes. This is not a pet. It has no name you would recognize, no owner to cuddle it. It is a professional, a specialist. It is a cat, and its sole purpose on this voyage is to ensure the integrity of the sacred texts. Its currency is survival, its payment the occasional scrap from the cook, and the endless supply of its designated prey. You can hear them sometimes, in the deeper silences between the groans of the ship, a faint, frantic scratching from within the walls. The sound of mice. To the monks and merchants on the deck above, this sound is a source of constant, low-grade anxiety. To the cat, it is the sound of a dinner bell. Historians debate the exact date of their arrival, with some evidence pointing to the 6th century, right around the time Buddhism was formally introduced to the Japanese court from the Korean kingdom of Beach. Other scholars are more confident in the subsequent Nara period, from 710 to 794 AD, when cultural and religious exchange with Tang China was at its peak. Regardless of the precise year, the purpose is rarely disputed. The first cats in Japan were not adorable companions for lonely aristocrats. They were biological security systems. The value of a single Buddhist sutra, painstakingly copied by a master calligrapher in a Chinese monastery, was immense. These texts were the software for a new religion and philosophy that would fundamentally reshape Japanese society, art, and politics. Protecting this software from the hardware-chewing teeth of rodents was a sacred duty. So you watch this small guardian. It doesn't pace or fret. It conserves its energy with a stillness that is almost meditative. It is the calm center of this swaying, creaking world. Its ears, two perfect triangles, pivot independently, mapping the sonic geography of the hold. A sudden lurch of the ship sends a crate sliding a few inches. The cat doesn't flinch. Its eyes remain fixed on a dark corner where the scratching was loudest a moment ago. This creature is a living embodiment of focused intent. While the humans above pray to deities for safe passage, this small mammal is engaged in a much more direct and practical form of protection. It's a funny thought, really. The lofty philosophical teachings of the Buddha, ideas that contemplate the nature of existence and the path to enlightenment, were depending for their safe arrival on the primordial, unblinking predatory instinct of a common cat. You imagine the world these cats came from. They were already domesticated in China and across the Asian mainland, valued for this exact purpose. They kept granaries safe, protected homes from pests, and most importantly, guarded the vast libraries of monasteries. The particular cat on your ship is probably small, with a lean body and a long tapering tail. The iconic Japanese bobtail, with its little puff of a tail, would become prominent much later, a product of breeding and evolution within Japan itself. This first arrival is an immigrant, a foreign specialist brought in for a job the local ecosystem had no candidate for. There were no native small felines in Japan that could be so easily domesticated and tasked with living in close quarters with humans on a ship. The journey is long. Days bleed into nights. The only clock is the slant of light coming through the wooden grate in the ceiling. Sometimes a monk descends the ladder, his simple robe smelling of incense, which briefly cuts through the maritime sense of the hold. He checks the lashings on the chests containing the sutras, his brow furrowed with worry. He might glance at the cat, a silent nod of acknowledgement between two very different kinds of guardians. The monk's protection is spiritual, the cat's is brutally practical. There's a certain quiet humor in the arrangement. The first librarians of Japan weren't scholars in robes, but felines with sharp claws and sharper hearing. You think about the mice. They're not evil, merely hungry. They are stowaways just like the cat, but with a much more destructive appetite. They see the precious ink-covered paper of the scrolls not as wisdom, but as a potential source of food or nesting material. Their existence represents a constant threat, a tiny nibbling entropy that seeks to undo the monumental effort of the scribes and scholars. And standing in the way of that entropy is this one small hunter. Suddenly there's a flicker of movement. The cat, previously a statue of patient stillness, transforms into a blur of fluid motion. It is a silent, lethal dance. A tiny squeak is abruptly cut off. The guardian returns to its corner, and the process of grooming begins, a meticulous resetting of its professional appearance. The sacred texts are safe for now. This scene, or one very much like it, is the foundational moment for every cat you will ever see in Japan. It's the starting point of their long, strange journey through the nation's history. They arrived not as conquerors or pets, but as humble, essential workers. They were not revered for their beauty or their grace, at least not at first. They were valued for their function. They were a tool, a very effective, self-maintaining, purring piece of technology designed for a single purpose: pest control. This utilitarian beginning is critical to understanding everything that comes next. It's the reason they were initially tied to temples and port towns, the very places where valuable, chewable goods were concentrated. As the ship finally makes landfall, you can feel the change in its rhythm. The constant rocking softens, the sounds from the world outside become clearer. The cries of gulls, the distant shouts of people on the shore. The cat feels it too. It stands, stretches languidly, and looks towards the light. Its tour of duty on the water is over. Now its work will begin on land. As the heavy wooden chests filled with scrolls are carefully unloaded and carried towards a newly constructed temple, the cat follows. It slips out of the hold and onto the soil of Japan, not with the uncertainty of a castaway, but with the quiet confidence of an employee starting a new assignment. It is one of the first of its kind to set paw in this land, and it carries with it the unseen legacy of 1,000 other ship cats and temple guardians. It is the ancestor, the pioneer, the furry little pilgrim whose descendants would one day find themselves the undisputed kings of their very own islands. And as you watch it disappear into the shadow of the temple gate, you know its story, and the story of Japan's relationship with it, is only just beginning. The temple grounds are a world of curated tranquility. You follow the small sand-colored cat as it pads silently across a path of raked white gravel, its paws leaving no trace. The air here is a complex blend of scents. The sharp, clean perfume of pine needles, the smoky ghost of incense clinging to ancient wood, and the earthy dampness from a moss garden tucked into a shady corner. The chaotic energy of the sea has been replaced by a profound, cultivated stillness. Monks in dark robes move with a deliberate, unhurried grace, their soft-soled sandals whispering on the polished wooden verandas. It is a place of discipline, meditation, and immense, quiet industry. And the cat, our small immigrant professional, fits right in. It understands purpose. Its new domain is larger and more complex than the ship's hold, but the mission remains identical. It is assigned unofficially to the Kyozo, the temple's scripture repository. This elegant wooden building houses the scrolls that were its shipmates, along with hundreds of others. It is a library of sacred thought, and the cat is its head of security. During the day, it might doze in a patch of sun on the veranda, appearing to be just another element of the temple's peaceful tableau. But this is not laziness. It is the patient conservation of energy you saw on the ship. Its ears are always working, cataloging the sounds of the temple. The distant, rhythmic chanting of the monks, the percussive thwack of a bamboo water feature, a Tashirojima, designed to startle deer, and the high-pitched skittering of its quarry within the walls. At night it truly goes to work. You watch it slip like a shadow through the corridors of the monks' quarters, a silent patrol past rooms where men are asleep on thin futons. It investigates the kitchens, a place of tempting smells, but it is not distracted by the leftover rice or vegetables. It is hunting for the hunters of grain, the mice that threaten the temple's winter stores. Its success is quiet and absolute. The monks notice it not by what the cat does but by what no longer happens. The stores of rice and barley remain untouched, the sacred scrolls in the library show no new signs of being nibbled, and the faint scratching in the walls that was once a constant annoyance has faded into silence. The cat is a success, and success breeds demand. Its kittens, born in the safety of the temple grounds, inherit its skills and its purpose. They are raised in this environment of quiet importance. A visiting nobleman, a patron of the temple, might hear the head monk praise the efficacy of his feline protectors. The nobleman, whose own storehouses of tax rice are a constant buffet for rodents, sees a practical solution. A gift is arranged. A young cat, a descendant of our original arrival, is transported from the quiet spirituality of the temple to the opulent, political world of an aristocratic manor in Heian-kyo, the new imperial capital. Here, the cat's life changes again. It is still a worker, but it is also a curiosity, a status symbol. You see it now, not on a gravel path, but on the polished silk tatami of a vast residence. Ladies of the court, dressed in layers of exquisitely colored silk, might watch it with amusement. They find its graceful movements and independent spirit charming. This is a subtle but profound shift. The cat is no longer just a tool. It's becoming an object of aesthetic appreciation. Famously, Emperor Yuta, who reigned in the late 9th century, kept a detailed diary, and in it, he wrote with incredible fondness about his cat, a beautiful black feline given to him as a gift. He praised its color, the way it moved, and its slightly foolish but endearing habit of catching its own tail. He writes about it like a doting father, a clear sign that at least in the highest echelons of society, the cat was beginning its journey from employee to companion. This elevated status led to a peculiar practice. Some of these early, valuable cats were kept on leashes. You can picture it. A noblewoman taking a stroll through her garden, holding a delicate silk cord attached to a small, and probably rather annoyed feline. It seems strange to us, but it highlights their immense value. A well-trained cat was a priceless asset, a furry piece of infrastructure for protecting wealth. To let one simply wander off would be like letting your best hunting dog or a prized horse run free. So it was leashed not out of cruelty but to protect the investment. This is the quirky reality of being a high-status pest controller in Heian-era Japan. It's a matter of some debate among cultural historians whether the common people were allowed to own cats during this early period, or if they were exclusively the property of the aristocracy and religious institutions. For a long time, the evidence suggests the latter. Cats were rare, foreign, and expensive. A common farmer or fisherman would have no access to one. They were part of the rarefied world of silk robes, poetry contests, and intricate courtly manners. A mouse chewing on a tax ledger in a government building was a serious problem, and the cat was the official, state-sanctioned solution. You can almost imagine them as the most efficient and least corrupt members of the imperial bureaucracy, silently going about their business while the humans engaged in political maneuvering. But no monopoly lasts forever. The country is growing. Port towns are becoming more important, bustling with trade and merchants. These merchants, a rising class, have warehouses full of goods. They have rice, textiles, and other valuable commodities that are just as tempting to rodents as any imperial scroll. These merchants see the cats in the noble houses, they hear the stories from the temples, and they understand their value. through trade or as gifts, or perhaps through a kitten that cleverly escapes its leashed life. The cats begin to move down the social ladder and into the commercial world. You are now in a busy port town. The air no longer smells of pine and incense, but of salt, fish, and damp earth. The quiet whispers of the temple have been replaced by the shouts of fishermen, the rumble of carts, and the general hum of commerce. In a dark, cavernous warehouse filled with towering bales of rice, you see a familiar shape. It is another cat, perhaps a dozen generations removed from the original scripture guardian. Its fur might be a different color, a calico mix of orange, black, and white, but its posture is the same. It is watching, waiting, the pinnacle predator in this man-made ecosystem of trade. Here, the cat's value is purely economic. There are no poems written about the warehouse cat, no doting diary entries. Its worth is measured in the amount of rice it saves from contamination, the number of bolts of cloth it keeps from being shredded for nesting material. It is once again a professional, a specialist in a new, more rough-and-tumble environment. The fishermen, who bring their catches to the docks, see these cats at work. They have their own pest problems, of course. Mice and rats are a constant nuisance on their boats, chewing through nets, lines, and stored food. They see the success of the warehouse cats, and a simple, powerful idea begins to form. If a cat can protect a warehouse full of rice, why can't it protect a boat full of fishing gear? The next logical step in the cat's expansion is about to be taken. A return to the sea. Not as a guardian of sacred texts this time, but as a practical partner to the hard-working men who make their living from the waves. The stage is being set for the next great chapter in their history, a chapter that will unfold on the small, isolated fishing islands off the coast. That simple, brilliant idea, to take the cats from the land to the sea, is taking root in the minds of fishermen all along the coast. It's a logical next step. But before that idea can truly blossom on the remote islands, a much larger, nationwide event unfolds that will forever change the status of the cat in Japan. It's an event that will utterly cement their importance, not just in temples or towns, but in the very economic fabric of the nation. To understand it, you have to leave the port town and travel inland, into the heart of the country, as a new era dawns. The Edo period. You find yourself in a different Japan. The country has been unified under the Tokugawa shogunate, and a long period of relative peace has settled over the land. With peace comes prosperity, and with prosperity comes industry. One of the most important industries, a source of incredible wealth and artistry, is sericulture, the cultivation of silkworms to produce silk. You are standing now on a small family farm, far from the capital. The air is sweet with the smell of mulberry leaves, which are being methodically stripped from branches by a farmer and his wife. Inside a long, low hut with paper screen windows is the heart of their operation. The sound from within is a faint, constant, dry rustling. It is the sound of thousands upon thousands of silkworms, all eating at once. You peek inside. On wide, flat bamboo trays stacked in rows are armies of pale, plump silkworms, munching their way through a mountain of mulberry leaves. This is a delicate, high-stakes business. These tiny creatures are the source of one of the world's most coveted materials. Their entire life cycle is carefully managed, from the hatching of the eggs to the moment they spin their precious cocoons. A single unbroken strand of silk that can be up to 1 kilometer long. The family's livelihood for the entire year depends on the success of this single harvest. The whole process is one of quiet, patient, and tense observation. But there is another creature that is intensely interested in the silkworms. Not for their silk, but as a source of food. You see the evidence in tiny droppings near the wall, a gnawed hole in a sack of grain in the corner. Mice and rats are the bane of the silk farmer's existence. They are drawn to the warmth and the food source, and an infestation can be catastrophic. They don't just eat the silkworms, they can startle them, causing them to stop producing silk, or chew through the finished cocoons, breaking the precious thread and rendering it worthless. For the farmer, the sound of a mouse is the sound of economic ruin. And so, sitting silently in the corner of the silk hut, is the family's most valuable employee. It's a calico cat, its patches of orange and black stark against the pale wood. It lies in a state of relaxed alertness, just like its ancestors on the ship and in the temple. Its presence is a deterrent, a silent warning to any rodent that might dare to venture inside. It is the guardian of the silk, the protector of the thread. This scene is being repeated in countless farmhouses across the entire country. As the demand for silk grew, both domestically and for limited foreign trade, the demand for effective pest control skyrocketed. The cat was no longer just a useful creature. It was an essential component of a vital national industry. They were effectively promoted from temple security guards to frontline defenders of the entire economy. The problem with rodents became so severe, so threatening to the burgeoning silk trade, that it reached the level of the government. In the early 17th century, the shogunate issued a stunning decree. The order went out across the land. All cats were to be set free. No one was to keep a cat confined, leashed, or indoors. They were to be let loose into the streets, the fields, and the farms. The government had officially deputized the entire feline population of Japan. Their job was now a matter of national policy: wander the country and hunt mice. Historians sometimes debate the true enforcement and reach of this decree, but its existence in the records points to a moment of genuine crisis where the nation's economic health was seen as directly dependent on its feline population. This decision had a profound and lasting impact. The cat's legal status was transformed overnight. It was no longer a piece of property to be bought, sold, or leashed. It became a kind of protected public utility, a free-roaming agent of the state. This led to a massive explosion in the cat population. With no restrictions on their movement or breeding, they flourished. They became a common sight in every city, town, and village. The rare, high-status creature of the Heian period was now a ubiquitous presence, a familiar part of the everyday landscape for everyone, from the richest lord to the poorest farmer. This new reality gave rise to a wonderfully peculiar piece of folklore. Since cats were so valuable but could no longer be owned, a strange market developed for something else: pictures of cats. It became a common belief that if you couldn't get a real cat to patrol your silk hut or your granary, a picture of a cat, hung prominently on the wall, could serve as a deterrent. Merchants sold woodblock prints and simple paintings of formidable-looking felines, and people bought them in the hope that mice would see the image and be too frightened to enter. It was a testament to the cat's reputation. Their pest-fighting prowess had become so legendary that even their mere image was thought to possess a kind of protective power. You can imagine a farmer, unable to attract one of the now free-roaming cats to his specific barn, sighing and heading to the local market to buy a picture of a fierce-looking tabby instead. It's a charmingly human solution. When you can't get the real thing, try a scarecrow, or in this case, a scaremouse painting. This period cemented the cat's place in the popular imagination. They were no longer just workers, they were lucky, they were protectors, they were a ubiquitous and essential part of life. And so, the stage is now perfectly set for the islands. The fishermen have the idea. And now, thanks to the demands of the silk industry and the subsequent government decree, the supply of cats is abundant. They are everywhere. They wander the docks, they patrol the warehouses. They are a self-sustaining, independent population. It is now a simple matter for a fisherman, heading out to his boat for a long trip, to entice a friendly dock cat to come along with the promise of a fish head or two. It's no longer the theft of a nobleman's property. It's a partnership with a fellow free agent. The cats are ready, the people are ready, and the boats are ready to carry them to their final destination. Those small rocky islands where their story will take its most peculiar turn yet. And so, the cat is everywhere. It is a self-sufficient, free-roaming, government-sanctioned pest control officer, wandering the length and breadth of Japan. Its population is booming, its reputation for diligence is unparalleled, and it is poised on the docks of 100 port towns, ready for the next phase of its journey. But as this physical expansion was happening, something else, something more ethereal and just as important, was also taking place. The cat was undergoing a promotion in the human imagination. It was moving from the department of practical labor into the far more mysterious and powerful department of luck. How does a creature, so long defined by its earthly job of hunting mice, become a metaphysical symbol for attracting good fortune? The transition is a wonderfully human piece of logic. For centuries, the presence of a cat meant your grain was safe, your scrolls were intact, your silkworms were protected. In short, the presence of a cat meant your wealth, whatever form it took, was secure. It's a very small leap from "the cat protects my money" to "the cat brings me money." The cat becomes a living, purring symbol of prosperity. If things are going well, it's because the cat is doing its job. Its quiet, calming presence becomes associated with stability and success. And it is during this same peaceful and prosperous Edo period that this association solidifies into an iconic image known the world over. The maneki-neko, the beckoning cat. You're walking through a bustling market street in Edo, the city that will one day be called Tokyo. The air is alive with the chatter of merchants and the sizzle of street food. Shops are packed side by side, selling everything from colorful woodblock prints to freshly made tofu. And at the entrance to a small shop selling rice crackers, you see it. A small ceramic cat sitting upright. It's plump and white with a friendly painted face and a red collar with a small bell. And most importantly, one of its front paws is raised, bent at the wrist in a gesture of welcome. Seems to be waving you in. This is the maneki-neko, and its job is no longer to chase mice, but to beckon customers and good fortune through the door. Folklorists and historians still debate the precise origin of the maneki-neko legend, with some tracing it to one temple, some to another, and some even suggesting it originated in the pleasure quarters of Yoshiwara as a symbol to entice clients. But all versions share a common theme: a cat performing an act that leads to unexpected good fortune. The most famous and gentle of these tales comes from the Gotokuji Temple, located right here in what is now modern-day Tokyo. Let yourself drift back to the 17th century. Gotokuji is a small, impoverished temple. The head monk is a kind, devout man, but the temple has fallen on hard times. He has very little money and often struggles to feed himself. Yet he always shares his meager meals with his beloved pet cat, a fluffy bobtail named Tama. He feels a quiet guilt for keeping the cat when he can barely survive, and sometimes he speaks to it, half joking, half praying. "Oh Tama," he might sigh, stroking the cat's back. "I have cared for you all this time. If you feel any gratitude, could you perhaps bring some good fortune to this temple?" One rainy summer afternoon, a powerful feudal lord, a samurai of high rank named Tsunetaka, is out hunting. A sudden thunderstorm rolls in, and he and his retainers take shelter under a large ancient tree near the struggling temple. As the rain pours down, the lord notices something strange at the temple gate. A small cat is sitting there, and it appears to be beckoning to him, raising its paw just like the statues you see today. Curious and perhaps a little amused, the lord decides to leave the safety of the tree and investigate. He walks towards the temple to get a better look at this peculiar waving cat. The moment he and his men are clear of the tree, a massive bolt of lightning strikes with a deafening crack, shattering the ancient tree exactly where they had been standing. They would have been killed instantly. The lord is stunned, realizing that the cat's strange gesture has just saved his life. He follows the cat into the temple, where he meets the poor, kindly monk. Grateful beyond words for his miraculous escape, Lord Tsunetaka becomes the patron of Gotokuji. He donates vast sums of money, funds its restoration, and makes it his family temple for generations to come. The once poor temple becomes prosperous and renowned, all thanks to the beckoning of one small cat. In honor of Tama, the cat that brought such incredible fortune, the first maneki-neko statues were created and sold at the temple, so that others might share in that same good luck. This story, whether historical fact or gentle folklore, perfectly captures the shift in the cat's role. It is no longer just preventing loss, it is actively generating gain. It is a conduit for good fortune. And the idea was infectious. Soon, merchants and shopkeepers everywhere wanted their own little piece of Tama's luck. They placed the ceramic statues in their businesses. A cat with its right paw raised was said to bring money and good fortune, while a left paw raised was said to bring in customers. There's a gentle, humorous debate about whether the cat is actually beckoning, in the Japanese style, or simply washing its face, a common feline behavior that old belief said was a sign that a visitor was coming. But humans, ever practical, chose to interpret the gesture in the most optimistic and financially beneficial way possible. So now you must add this new layer of meaning to the creature at the center of our story. By the time cats are being regularly transported to the fishing islands, they are not just mousers. They are not just former guardians of scripture or ex-defenders of the silk trade. They are now carrying a heavy suitcase of cultural symbolism. They are walking, purring lucky charms. A fisherman on the docks looks at a stray calico and doesn't just see an animal that can keep his nets from being chewed. He sees a potential partner, a living talisman that might protect him from a storm, lead him to a bigger catch, and ensure his safe return. This deep-seated belief in the cat as a bringer of good fortune is the final crucial ingredient. It will transform the relationship between the islanders and their new feline residents from one of simple utility to one of deep, abiding, and often superstitious reverence. The final piece is in place. The cat is not just a worker, not just a national asset, but a vessel of fortune, a living talisman. And now, with this understanding packed away in your mind like a precious souvenir, the journey can finally leave the shores of the mainland. It's time to go to the islands. You find yourself standing on the worn deck of a small rumbling ferry, the Mermaid 2. The air is cool and tastes of salt and diesel fumes. The steady, hypnotic thrum of the engine vibrates up through the soles of your feet, a calming, monotonous rhythm. You are pulling away from Ishinomaki Port, on the coast of mainland Japan, heading out into the vast, blue expanse of the Pacific Ocean. The coastline recedes, its cities and towns shrinking until they are just a hazy line between the sea and the sky. The only companions on your journey are the white-capped waves and a few circling black-tailed gulls, whose cries sound both mournful and curious. For about an hour, there is nothing but this gentle rocking, the engine's drone, and the endless water. It's a moment of transition, a cleansing of the palate. You are leaving the complex, sprawling history of Japan behind and heading towards a place where that history has been distilled into something smaller, more concentrated, and far more peculiar. Then it appears. At first, it's just a dark smudge on the horizon, a slightly deeper shade of blue against the pale sky. But as the ferry chugs onward, the smudge grows, taking on shape and texture. It becomes a low, green hill rising from the sea. This is Tashirojima. As you get closer, you can make out the rocky shoreline, the dense green of the trees covering the island's spine, and the clusters of buildings huddled around two small natural harbors. The island isn't large. You could walk its entire coastline in just a few hours. From a distance, it looks peaceful, unremarkable, just one of many small, inhabited islands that dot the Japanese coast. The ferry slows as it navigates into the port of Naitoda, the larger of the island's two villages. The first thing you notice is that this is not a tourist trap. It is a working fishing port, weathered and authentic. Small fishing boats, painted in blues and whites, bob gently in the protected water. The docks are cluttered with nets, buoys, and plastic crates. The air is thick with the briny, unmistakable smell of the sea and the day's catch. The houses are modest, clad in wood that has been silvered by years of sun and salt spray, with tiled roofs of a somber gray. It feels quiet, lived in, a place where time moves at a different pace. And then you see them. At first, it's just one, a handsome ginger tabby, sitting sphinx-like on a seawall, watching the ferry arrive with an air of supreme indifference. Then you see another, a sleek black cat, slipping out from beneath a parked truck. A calico with a ridiculously short, puffy tail. A classic Japanese bobtail stretches languidly in a patch of sunlight on the pier. They are not swarming you, not yet. They are simply there. They are as much a part of the port's scenery as the boats and the nets. They are the quiet, furry proprietors of this small kingdom. To understand why they are here, and in such numbers, you have to understand the unique history of this specific piece of rock. Remember those silk huts from the Edo period? The ones that made cats a national necessity? For a long time, Tashirojima had those too. The island's name itself gives a clue. Tashiro has characters related to fields and paddies, though here it might be more broadly interpreted. But a key industry, especially for families looking to supplement their income during the off-season for fishing, was sericulture. They cultivated silkworms here, in the same way as the inland farmers. And so they needed cats for the exact same reason, to protect the fragile, valuable worms from mice. But unlike the inland farms, that was only half the story. The primary industry of Tashirojima has always been fishing. The men of the island were fishermen, masters of navigating the coastal currents. They practiced a type of fishing called setnet fishing, which involved leaving large, complex nets in the water for extended periods. This meant they had vast quantities of expensive netting that, when not in use, had to be brought ashore for mending and storage. These stored nets, smelling of fish and brine, were an irresistible target for mice, who would chew through them, causing damage that was both costly and time-consuming to repair. So the islanders needed cats on the shore to protect the nets, just as they needed them in the hills to protect the silkworms. A cat on Tashirojima in the 18th or 19th century had a choice of careers. It could apply for a land-based position in the textiles industry, or it could opt for a career in maritime equipment protection. This dual economy created a perfect storm for a feline population boom. Cats were not just wanted here, they were doubly essential. Local historians and residents sometimes have differing accounts on whether sericulture or fishing was the primary driver for the initial cat population boom, though most agree the two industries worked in tandem to make the island a perfect feline habitat. It was a place where a cat could hardly walk a few feet without stumbling upon a job opening. This unique economic situation, this codependency on two different fronts, created an environment where cats were not just tolerated or even lucky, but actively encouraged and cared for. They weren't just free-roaming public servants as they were on the mainland, they were business partners. A healthy, happy cat meant a healthy, intact fishing net and a successful silk harvest. The well-being of the cats was directly tied to the well-being of the human residents. This is the foundation upon which all the folklore and reverence is built. As you step off the ferry and onto the solid ground of the pier, you feel like you've stepped into the heart of our story. The theoretical history has become a tangible place. The gentle sea breeze carries the scent of the tide, and from somewhere up the narrow lane leading into the village, you hear the faint musical sound of a cat's meow. The sun is beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the harbor. The day trippers are getting back on the ferry to leave, and a deeper quiet is settling over the island. You are here to stay for the night, to see what this place is like after the visitors are gone, when it belongs only to the fishermen and their feline partners. The ferry's engine has faded to a distant hum, finally disappearing completely. A profound quiet, the kind you only find on small islands far from the mainland, descends upon the Naitoto harbor. The setting sun has painted the undersides of the clouds in shades of soft pink and orange, and the water in the harbor is a dark, glassy mirror reflecting the last light of the day. You walk along the narrow road that winds through the village, past houses where lights are beginning to glow in the windows. The air has grown cooler, carrying the clean, sharp scent of the ocean and the faintest hint of wood smoke from a distant chimney. The cats are on the move. They emerge from their daytime napping spots, gathering in small, expectant groups near the doorsteps of the houses, their forms little more than silhouettes in the deepening twilight. This is the time when the relationship between the islanders and the cats shifts from a passive coexistence to an active, ritualized interaction. An elderly woman slides open her door, and several cats turn their heads in unison. She doesn't shoo them away. Instead, she puts down a plate of fish scraps and chopped leftovers from her dinner. There is no frantic rush. The cats eat with a kind of polite decorum, as if they are dinner guests. This scene is repeated at houses all along the lane. This isn't just feeding strays. It is a fundamental part of the island's social fabric. It is the payment for services rendered, a thank you for the day's work of protecting nets and, more importantly, for the information they provide. For the fishermen of Tashirojima, these cats were far more than lucky mousers. They were partners, colleagues, and, most crucially, they were the island's most reliable meteorologists and stock market analysts. Their lives and livelihoods were utterly dependent on the whims of the sea. The waters off the Sanriku coast are notoriously treacherous and unpredictable. A calm, sunny morning can turn into a raging storm by the afternoon. Before the age of radio and satellite weather, a fisherman's ability to read the subtle signs of nature was the only thing that stood between a good catch and total disaster. And on Tashirojima, the most trusted signs came from the cats. You sit with an imaginary old fisherman on his porch, the wood worn smooth by time, and he explains it to you in a low, gravelly voice. He points to a cat meticulously washing its face, using its paw to scrub behind its ears. When they do that, he says, not taking his eyes off the cat, rain is coming. You can be sure of it. This belief is widespread in many parts of the world, but here it was not a quaint piece of trivia. It was actionable intelligence. A fisherman seeing that behavior in the morning might decide to keep his boat closer to shore, or to double-check the lashings on his gear. Another quirky but deeply held belief was the sneeze. If a cat let out a sudden sneeze, it was also taken as a sure sign of impending rain. The forecasts weren't just about rain. They could predict more serious weather. If the island's cats were universally lazy, sleepy, and seeking shelter even on a fair day, It was considered a warning. It meant a big storm, a typhoon perhaps, was brewing far out at sea. Its low-pressure system felt by the cats long before any human could detect a change. This was the most valuable forecast of all, a potential lifesaver. The cats became living barometers, their collective mood a direct readout of atmospheric conditions. A young, modernist fisherman in the 20th century might have trusted the new barometer he bought in the city, but his father and grandfather would consult the cats first, their decades of experience telling them that the feline forecast was more reliable. While modern science would attribute these beliefs to confirmation bias, the human tendency to remember the times the cat's face washing was followed by rain, and forget the times it wasn't. Cultural anthropologists see it as a beautiful example of a community co-creating meaning with its animal partners. It's a system of deep listening, of paying such close attention to the natural world that you find patterns everywhere. For the fishermen, these patterns worked. They were woven into the fabric of their daily decision-making process, a crucial data point in the complex calculus of survival. Beyond predicting the weather, the cats were also believed to be able to predict the fish. Their mysterious connection to the natural world, it was thought, extended beneath the waves. Before setting out in the pre-dawn darkness, a fisherman would observe the cats near the docks. If a cat was particularly energetic, friendly, and rubbed against his legs, it was a good omen, a sign that the ocean would be generous that day. He would give it a choice piece of bait as an offering, an investment in the day's luck. Some even believed that by watching the direction a cat stared out to sea, they could get a hint as to where the fish were schooling. The cats weren't just predicting the weather, they were providing fishing reports. This constant daily process of observation and interpretation forged an incredibly deep and intimate bond. The cats were no longer just a tool for pest control, or even a passive symbol of luck like a statue on a shelf. They were active consultants. Their opinions were sought, their moods were analyzed, their smallest actions were imbued with meaning. They held a respected, integrated position within the community. They were part of the team. As the last of the light fades and the stars begin to appear in the clear, dark sky, you see a fisherman heading down to his boat, readying his gear for the morning. He notices a small black cat watching him from the pier. He pauses, watches the cat for a long moment, and gives it a slight, respectful nod. He has seen what he needed to see. In his mind, he has received his forecast for the coming day. He has consulted his partner, his furry four-legged navigator, and with that reassurance, he is ready to face the sea. The next morning, you wake to the sound of distant boat engines and the cry of gulls. The sun is up, and the island is bathed in a clear, bright light. After witnessing the evening rituals and understanding the deep, consultative role the cats play in the fishermen's lives, you decide to make a pilgrimage. You are going to find the ultimate physical proof of this incredible partnership, the heart of the island's feline reverence. You leave the small cluster of houses in the harbor behind and follow a narrow, paved path that winds up into the forested hills that form the island's spine. The sounds of the village quickly fade, replaced by a new symphony. The rustle of leaves in the gentle sea breeze, the chirping of unseen birds in the canopy above, and the steady, quiet rhythm of your own footsteps on the path. The air is cooler here beneath the shade of the trees, and it smells of damp earth and green living things. You pass by small, abandoned farmhouses and overgrown fields, quiet relics of the island's past when sericulture was still a thriving industry. And of course, you are never truly alone. A sleek black and white cat might watch you pass from the branch of a tree, its tail twitching with curiosity. A shy tabby might dart across the path ahead of you, disappearing into the undergrowth. They are the native inhabitants of this woodland, the silent keepers of its secrets. After a gentle walk of about 20 minutes, you find it. It's not grand or imposing. There is no towering temple gate or vast courtyard. In a small clearing just off the path, nestled amongst the trees, is the Neko-jinja, the cat shrine. It is small, humble, and deeply moving in its simplicity. The central object is a simple stone edifice, weathered by decades of wind and rain, moss growing in its crevices. It is clearly a place of reverence, built by hand with materials from the island itself. It feels less like a formal religious site, and more like a heartfelt personal monument. And surrounding it are the offerings. This is where the shrine's living nature becomes truly apparent. You see the expected things: Coins dropped into a collection box, small cups that may have once held sake. But the majority of the offerings are for the shrine-specific deity. There are dozens of small cat figurines, from classic maneki-neko beckoning cats to realistic ceramic statues of tabbies and calicos. There are small hand-painted stones with cat faces on them. There are laminated photos of beloved pets that visitors have left behind. And in a touch that is both wonderfully quirky and deeply logical, there are unopened cans of tuna and small bags of cat kibble. This must be one of the few deities in the world that can be directly appeased with a can of premium brand fish. So how did this sacred place come to be? You sit on a nearby rock and let the story unfold in your mind, a tale passed down through generations of islanders. It begins, as so many things do here, with the fishing industry. The island's fishermen used nets weighted down with stones to keep them in place in the strong coastal currents. Part of their regular work was gathering suitable rocks from the hillsides to use as these weights, or funibari-ishi. One day, a group of fishermen was engaged in this task, prying stones from the earth and preparing them to be carried down to the boats. As they worked, a large rock was accidentally dislodged. It tumbled down a short embankment and in a moment of tragic bad luck, it landed directly on one of the cats that often lounged nearby, watching the men work. The cat was killed instantly. The fisherman responsible was horrified. This was not just the accidental death of an animal. Within the island's belief system, it was a terrible omen. This was a potential disaster. He and the other fishermen were overcome with guilt and a deep, practical fear. They had killed one of the island's guardians, one of the bringers of luck, one of the forecasters of storms. What terrible retribution might the spirits of the cats bring down upon them? Would their nets now be empty? Would storms now come without warning? The act, though accidental, had upset the delicate balance between the human and feline worlds. Their response was not to hide the event or to simply forget it. Their response, deeply rooted in the traditions of Japan's native Shinto religion, was to build a shrine. In Shintoism, spirits or kami can exist in anything from mountains and trees to ancestors and, yes, animals. The islanders' reverence for the cats was so profound that they already viewed them as possessing a kind of divine spirit. The only proper way to atone for the accidental death, and to ensure the continued goodwill of the Nikogami, the cat deity, was to create a sacred place to honor its spirit. They chose the very spot where the cat had died, making the ground itself sacred. While the exact date of the shrine's construction is a subject of local oral tradition rather than precise written record, its existence serves as undeniable physical proof of the reverence the islanders held for their feline partners. It is the ultimate expression of the cat's journey in Japanese culture, a journey you have been tracing, from a utilitarian pest controller on a ship, to a status symbol in a palace, to a national economic asset in the silk fields, to a lucky charm in a shop window, and finally here in the heart of this small island, to a deity worthy of worship. This small, quiet shrine is the emotional climax of the story. It is a monument to a relationship built over centuries, a relationship of mutual need, respect, and even love. It began with the simple, practical problem of mice, and it culminated in a complex spiritual belief system where a clumsy accident required the building of a church. As you stand to leave, you place a small coin in the offering box, a tiny gesture of respect for the fallen cat, and for the deeply human story its memory created. You give a final nod to the little stone statues, the silent congregation of this most unusual place of worship, before turning back down the path towards the sea. You walk back down the path from the Nikko Jinja, your mind full of the quiet power of that small sacred clearing. As you emerge from the woods and see the village of Naitoda spread out below you again, you begin to notice things you hadn't before. Your journey so far has been through the island's vibrant past, a time of thriving industry, deep-seated belief, and a bustling if small community. But now, as you look closer, you see the ghosts of that past everywhere. You see a house with a sagging roof, its paper screens torn and fluttering in the breeze. You see a fishing boat pulled far up onto the shore, covered in a weathered tarp, looking as if it hasn't touched the water in years. The quiet that you first interpreted as peaceful now has a different quality. It is also the quiet of emptiness. The profound partnership that led to the building of a shrine for a cat was the peak of a certain way of life. But no way of life, no matter how balanced or revered, is immune to the relentless march of time. The story of Tashirojima in the 20th century is one of a slow, gentle, and irreversible parting of ways. It is not the story of the cats leaving, but of the humans. You must now witness the quiet exodus that set the stage for the cat island we know today. The change begins after the Second World War. Japan, with breathtaking speed, begins to rebuild and transform itself into an industrial and technological powerhouse. This is the era of the Japanese economic miracle. Factories spring up, cities swell, and the lure of a new kind of life, a life of salarymen, modern apartments, cars, and televisions, becomes an irresistible force. For a young person growing up on Tashirojima in the 1950s or 60s, the world suddenly offered possibilities that their parents and grandparents could never have dreamed of. Picture a teenage boy on the island during this time. His father and grandfather are fishermen. Their hands are stained with bait and lined from mending nets. Their days are ruled by the tides and the feline weather forecasts. For generations, this was the only path. But now this boy attends the small island school, and he reads textbooks that show pictures of Tokyo's gleaming new towers and talk of careers in engineering and business. He listens to pop music on a crackly transistor radio, a sound that seems to come from another planet. The ferry that was once just a lifeline to the mainland for supplies now looks like an escape route to the future. The pull of the cities was immense, but there was also a push from the island itself. The old industries were fading. Large-scale, mechanized fishing fleets based in major ports made it harder for small, independent island fishermen to compete. The demand for homespun silk disappeared in the face of new synthetic fabrics like nylon. The dual economy that had made the island a perfect cat habitat was crumbling. The very reasons for the community's existence were slowly eroding. And so the exodus began. It wasn't a dramatic flight, but a slow, steady trickle. A son would leave to attend high school on the mainland and just never come back. A daughter would move to Sendai to work in a department store, and would marry a man from the city. They would send money home, they would visit for holidays, but their lives were now elsewhere. You can imagine the quiet, bittersweet goodbyes on the dock. A young person with a single suitcase, promising to write, hugging parents who knew deep down that this was likely a one-way trip. The sound of the ferry engine, once a symbol of connection, now became the sound of separation. This process of rural depopulation, known in Japan as kasoka, is a major, well-documented social phenomenon. It has affected thousands of rural communities, but on a small, isolated island, the effects are magnified. The island's population, which peaked at around 1,000 people in the 1950s, began to fall decade by decade. Sociologists and demographers still analyze the complex push and pull factors of this migration, debating whether the pull of the city's excitement was stronger than the push of declining local industries. But for the people of Tashirojima, it was simply reality. One of the most poignant milestones in this decline was the closing of the island's only school in 1989. You can almost feel the silence on that last day, the final ringing of a bell in a building that would never again hold the laughter of children. The closure of a school is a definitive statement about a community's future. It is an admission that there are no more young families, that a generation is missing. The residents who remained were the elderly, those too attached to the island to leave, the ones who had run the boats and farmed the silk, the keepers of the old ways. And what of the cats? Their world was changing too, but they were not leaving. Their human partners were dwindling, but the feline population remained stable, even grew. Their role began to shift once more. As the human community aged, the cats became more important than ever, not as business partners, but as companions. For an elderly person living alone in a house built for a large family, the steady, warm presence of a cat was a comfort, a furry bulwark against loneliness. They were a living link to the island's past, a constant in a world of quiet disappearances. As houses were abandoned, the cat's territory grew. An empty, derelict building was not a sad sight for a cat. It was a new sheltered place to raise a litter of kittens. The village built for 1,000 humans was slowly being inherited by a few hundred felines. The power dynamic, so long balanced in a delicate partnership, was tilting. The cats were becoming the island's true, permanent residents. You walk through the village in the late afternoon. You see an old man sitting on his porch, meticulously mending a net, a calico cat dozing at his feet. You see an old woman tending her small garden, a black cat weaving through her legs. These are the last guardians of the human-cat partnership. They are living in a village that has become too big for its human population, surrounded by the ghosts of their children and grandchildren who left for another world. The silence is deep, and in that silence, the soft patting of paws on pavement and the sound of a gentle, contented purr is becoming the dominant sound of the island. The story of Tashirojima, with its aging guardians and its feline inheritors, feels like a unique and poignant tale. It seems like a perfect, singular example of how history, industry, and belief can intertwine to create a peculiar cat-centric world. But it is not the only one. What if you were to tell you that the process you witnessed on Tashirojima, the quiet human exodus and the steadfast feline persistence, has happened elsewhere, and in an even more extreme and concentrated form? What if Tashirojima is not the final chapter, but merely a prelude to a starker, more astonishing feline kingdom? To find it, your journey must continue. You must travel from the rugged Pacific coast of northeastern Japan, far to the southwest, to the calm island-dotted waters of the Seto Inland Sea. You are going to Aoshima. The journey itself feels different. The ferry is not the relatively spacious, sturdy vessel that brought you to Tashirojima. This is a small functional boat, little more than a water taxi, with room for maybe 30 people. It feels less like a tourist vessel and more like a lifeline. Its primary purpose to shuttle the few remaining residents and essential supplies back and forth. The sea here is different too. The Seto Inland Sea is sheltered, protected by Japan's 3 main islands. The waves don't have the deep, powerful roll of the open Pacific. The water is calmer, the mood more serene. You pass other small green islands, some inhabited, some not, like stones scattered across a vast, tranquil pond. The trip is shorter, only about half an hour, but the sense of isolation is paradoxically even greater. The ferry to Aoshima is famously temperamental. It only runs twice a day, and it can be cancelled at a moment's notice due to weather that would be considered mild on the Pacific coast. Visiting here requires a certain commitment, and the knowledge that packing a lunch is not a friendly suggestion, but a crucial survival tip. There is nothing to buy on Aoshima. No inns, no restaurants, no souvenir shops, not even a single vending machine. The island offers no amenities, only itself. As the boat approaches the small concrete harbor of Aoshima, the scene that unfolds is both similar to and dramatically different from Tashirojima. You see the same modest, weathered houses clustered near the water. You see the same quiet, the same lack of cars or commercial hustle. But the feline welcoming committee is on an entirely different scale. As the ferry's engine changes pitch upon approach, it acts as a signal. From alleyways, from beneath upturned boats, from the rooftops of abandoned houses, they emerge. Dozens of them, then scores. By the time the ferry docks and the ramp is lowered, the pier is a writhing, meowing carpet of cats of every color and description. The cat-to-human ratio here is legendary and frankly astonishing. On Tashirojima, the cats are a huge majority, but here the disparity is breathtaking. At the peak of its modern fame, there were reports of as few as 5 or 6 elderly human residents sharing the island with well over 200 cats. That's a ratio approaching 40-1. This isn't a village with a lot of cats. It's a cat colony with a few human caretakers. The overwhelming sensory input is feline. The air is filled with a chorus of meows. The ground seems to move with a tide of fur and tails. And your every step is monitored by 100 pairs of curious, hopeful eyes. This is the first great contrast with Tashirojima, the sheer, undeniable density of the cat population. The second is the island's physical and social landscape. While Tashirojima felt like a functioning, if sleepy and aged village, Aoshima feels more like a relic. It feels like a place where the human story has almost entirely concluded, and you are walking through its epilogue. The lack of any commercial activity whatsoever gives it an eerie, preserved in amber quality. It is a pure, undiluted version of the Kasoka phenomenon. Urban planners and rural sociologists often point to islands like Aoshima as an extreme endpoint of this trend, a living laboratory for what happens when a human community almost entirely vanishes, leaving its infrastructure and dependent animals behind. The island's history is also much simpler, much starker than Tashirojima's. Its human settlement is more recent. It was primarily a base for sardine fishermen, a community that truly established itself after World War II. Its population peaked at around 900 people in the 1940s and 50s, a bustling, hardworking community packed onto a tiny strip of land. But the sardine industry, like the coastal fishing of the Northeast, eventually declined. And the pull of the mainland cities was just as strong here as it was for the youth of Tashirojima. The exodus was swift and total, leaving only a handful of original residents who refused to leave the only home they had ever known. You step onto the pier, and you are immediately but gently swarmed. The cats rub against your legs, they look up at you with expectant faces, they purr in a collective, rumbling chorus. They are not aggressive, merely incredibly friendly and forward. They are used to visitors being the primary source of food and attention. There is no folklore here of cats predicting the weather, no ancient shrine built to a fallen feline. There was no dual economy of silk and fishing to cement their importance. The story of Aoshima's cats is less mystical, more direct, and in some ways even more compelling in its simplicity. As you stand on that pier, the sole focus of 100 hungry, hopeful cats, you feel the profound difference. Tashirojima felt like a partnership, albeit a faded one. This feels like a takeover. A gentle, purring, overwhelmingly cute takeover, but a takeover nonetheless. The question hangs in the air, as loud as the collective meow surrounding you. If there was no silk industry, no ancient reverence, how did this happen? How did a simple fishing outpost transform into the planet's most concentrated feline kingdom? The answer is more straightforward than you might think, and it begins with the same problem that started our entire journey back on that ship centuries ago. The simple, pesky, and ever-present mouse. You walk away from the pier, moving past the initial wave of the feline welcoming committee. As you venture into the narrow lanes that serve as the village's streets, the intensity of the meowing subsides. The cats, realizing you are not an immediate source of food, begin to disperse, melting back into the island's landscape. They are still everywhere, lounging on the sun-bleached lids of styrofoam boxes, peering down from the tiled roofs of derelict houses, grooming themselves on the steps of what was once a community center. The atmosphere shifts from one of frantic welcome to one of quiet observation. You are now in their kingdom and they are watching you. And in this relative quiet, you can finally ponder the question that hangs over this incredible place. How? How did it get to this point without the deep, layered history of Tashirojima? The answer, you realize, is beautifully and brutally simple. The story of Aoshima's cats has none of the spiritual or economic complexities of Tashirojima's. There was no precious silkworm industry to protect. There were no ancient beliefs about cats as lucky charms, no gradual promotion from worker to deity. The story here did not begin with a sacred duty or a quest for good fortune. It began with a straightforward, practical, and deeply annoying problem: mice. Let your mind drift back to Aoshima in the 1950s. The island is at its peak. Nearly 1,000 people live on this tiny speck of land. The harbor is bustling with wooden fishing boats, and the main industry is sardine fishing. Life is hard, but the community is vibrant. But with so many boats, so much stored gear, and so much human activity comes an inevitable nibbling plague. The fishermen's boats are constantly being invaded by mice. The small rodents stow away, breeding in the holds, chewing through expensive fishing nets, gnawing on ropes, and getting into the fishermen's personal food supplies for their long days at sea. It was a constant, costly, and infuriating nuisance. On Tashirojima, the cats were already present due to the silk trade, and their transition to maritime work was a natural extension of their duties. Here on Aoshima, there was no pre-existing feline workforce, so the fishermen, being practical men, came up with a practical solution. They decided to import one. Sometime in the mid-20th century, a few fishermen went to the mainland and returned with a small number of cats. The exact number is lost to history, but most accounts agree it was just a handful. These cats were not brought over as pets. They were brought over as employees. Their job description was simple: live on the island, patrol the docks, and hunt the mice that were plaguing the fishing fleet. The initial job interview for these first feline settlers must have been refreshingly direct. Are you a cat? Are you proficient in rodent detection and apprehension? You're hired. There was no need for a belief in their mystical powers. This was a purely biological solution to a biological problem. The cats were set loose, and they did what cats do best. They were incredibly effective. The mouse problem on the boats and around the docks began to decline sharply. For the fishermen, the experiment was a resounding success. They had solved their pest problem with ruthless, purring efficiency. This is where the story of Aoshima diverges so powerfully from Tashirojima. The human-cat bond here was not forged through generations of shared spiritual belief, but through a simple, effective business transaction. The cats provided a service, and in return, they were given a home with an abundant food source, mice and later, fish scraps from the daily catch, and most importantly, an environment with absolutely no natural predators. No foxes, no stray dogs, no predatory birds large enough to threaten a cat. They were at the very top of the island's food chain. Ecologists and island biogeographers often study places like Aoshima as a classic case of what's called mesopredator release. It's a scientific term for what happens when you introduce a mid-sized predator, like a cat, into a closed system where it has plenty of food and nothing hunting it. The result is an unchecked, exponential population boom. That small handful of original feline employees, left to their own devices in this perfect habitat, began to breed. And their kittens bred. And their kittens bred. Within a few decades, the population exploded. The fishermen, in solving their mouse problem, had inadvertently kicked off a chain reaction that would one day see their own species become the minority on the island. As you walk through the quiet, crumbling village today, you see the evidence of this simple origin everywhere. The cats are not revered with shrines. They are simply present. They have inherited the island not through divine right, but through sheer biological success. They are the ultimate survivors, the descendants of a few hardy pioneers brought in to do a dirty job. The relationship the remaining elderly residents have with them is born not of ancient superstition, but of something more direct, a kind of inherited responsibility. Their fathers and grandfathers brought the cats here. They made a deal. And now, in the twilight of the island's human history, the last few residents are upholding their end of the bargain, caring for the great-great-great-grandchildren of the island's first and most effective workers. It's a powerful realization. The incredible scene before you is not the result of magic or complex folklore. It is the result of a simple plan that worked a little too well, combined with the profound social shifts that emptied the island of its people. The cats of Aoshima are a living monument to pragmatism, a furry testament to the law of unintended consequences. And as they watch you with their knowing yellow eyes, you feel like they understand this better than anyone. They know they weren't chosen by the gods. They were hired for a job and they ended up owning the company. For decades, the stories of Tashirojima and Aoshima unfolded in near-total isolation. They were quiet, self-contained worlds, their unique demographics and feline-centric lifestyles known only to their dwindling residents and the occasional visitor from the mainland. They were footnotes in the grand history of Japan, places where time had slowed to a crawl. They existed in a peaceful analog bubble, untouched by the accelerating pace of the modern world. And then, in the early years of the 21st century, that bubble was punctured. The internet, with its billion curious eyes, discovered them. The discovery was not a single event, but a slow burn that quickly erupted into a global bonfire. Your journey now takes you not to a physical place, but into the non-space of the digital world. Picture a lone Japanese travel blogger in the mid-2000s. He's an adventurer of a modern sort, seeking out the forgotten corners of his own country. He hears a rumor of a small island near Ishinomaki where cats outnumber people. Intrigued, he makes the journey. He's not a fisherman seeking forecasts or a merchant protecting silk. He is armed with a new kind of tool, a DSLR camera. He spends a day on Tashirojima, captivated by what he sees. He photographs the cats on the seawalls, the shrine in the woods, the quiet interactions between the felines and the elderly residents. That night, back on the mainland, he uploads his photos to his personal blog. He writes a post describing this strange, charming, and melancholic place. He titles it something like, "A Visit to the Island Ruled by Cats." A few of his followers read it. They share the link on a Japanese internet forum, a place like 2channel or Mixi. Others see the photos, the sheer unbelievable cuteness and peculiarity of it all. The post begins to get passed around, a small digital ripple. More photographers and bloggers make their own pilgrimages, adding their own photos and stories to the growing online collection. The legend of Tashirojima begins to solidify within Japan's digital sphere. The first major leap to global consciousness came when international news agencies, always hungry for quirky human interest stories, caught on. A journalist at a Tokyo bureau for a company like Reuters or the Associated Press sees one of these popular blog posts. They commission a story. A professional photojournalist is sent to the island. Suddenly, high-quality, professional images of Tashirojima and its cats are being broadcast on the global news wire. The story is picked up by The Guardian in the UK, The Huffington Post in the US, and news channels around the world. They give it a catchy, irresistible name: Cat Heaven Island. The fuse was lit, but it was the rise of social media that made the powder keg explode. The story was perfect for platforms like Facebook and Twitter. It had everything: cute animals, the internet's foundational currency, a compelling human story, and the allure of a secret travel destination. A photo gallery of the cats of Tashirojima or Aoshima was guaranteed to get thousands of shares, likes, and retweets. Media theorists often cite the Cat Island phenomenon as a perfect case study in viral content, combining the internet's love for cats with the powerful modern desire to discover authentic, off-the-beaten-path experiences. Then, in 2011, a real-world disaster paradoxically cemented Tashirojima's global fame. The Great Tohoku earthquake and tsunami devastated the region where the island is located. In the chaotic aftermath, as the world watched the horrific footage from the mainland, a wave of online concern grew for the fate of Tashirojima. People who had only just read about Cat Island were now frantically searching for news. "What happened to the cats?" became a common refrain in forums and on social media. News reporters were dispatched, and the eventual story was one of qualified relief. The island had been damaged and tragically lost some residents and fishing boats, but it had been largely protected from the worst of the waves by its location and topography. Most of the cats had survived. The resulting global sigh of relief, and the donations that poured in to help rebuild the island's docks, forged an emotional connection between the island and millions of people who had never set foot there. Tashirojima was no longer just a curiosity. It was a story of survival. A similar, if less dramatic, process unfolded for Aoshima. Its even more extreme cat-to-human ratio made for even more shocking and shareable photos. A single tweet with a picture of the Aoshima pier teeming with cats could circle the globe in a matter of hours. The two islands became unlikely international celebrities. For the cats, of course, nothing had changed. They were completely unaware of their newfound global stardom. A calico cat sunning itself on Aoshima had no idea it was the star of a viral BuzzFeed article. Its concerns remained, as always, the time of the next ferry, the generosity of the visitor holding the camera, and the location of the best afternoon napping spot. For the few elderly residents, this sudden deluge of attention was bewildering. Imagine an 80-year-old fisherman on Tashirojima, who has spent his entire life in quiet partnership with the island's cats, suddenly being confronted by a group of tourists from Australia or Germany. They don't speak his language, but they enthusiastically show him pictures of his own village on their smartphones, trying to explain the concept of a like or a share. He would have been baffled by this strange new form of reverence, so different from the quiet, practical respect he had always known. The age of isolation was definitively over. The quiet, forgotten islands were now firmly on the map. Not the official map of Japan, but the much more influential, chaotic, and powerful map of the global internet. The world knew their secret. And once a secret like that is out, the world wants to come and see it for itself. The click of the camera shutter and the ping of a social media notification were the new sounds of the island, heralding a new era that would bring with it a host of blessings and burdens that no one, least of all the cats, could ever have expected. The secret is out. The quiet islands, once lost in the mists of time and the backwaters of the Japanese archipelago, are now global celebrities. And with celebrity comes the entourage. Your vantage point shifts. You are no longer an invisible observer of the past, but a witness to the daily reality of the present. You are standing on the pier at Aoshima, but it's no longer just you and the initial welcoming committee. You are now part of a crowd, a diverse group of people stepping off the small ferry, their faces alight with excitement. They are armed with telephoto lenses, selfie sticks, and oversized bags brimming with cat treats. The tourist age has arrived, and it is a force of nature as powerful and transformative as any storm the island's feline forecasters ever predicted. This new reality is a classic double-edged sword, a complex mix of blessing and burden that the islands are still grappling with today. First, the blessing. You cannot deny the good that this sudden influx of attention has brought. For these tiny, fading communities, the tourism boom was a lifeline. On both Tashirojima and Aoshima, the regular ferry service was a critical link to the mainland for the elderly residents, providing access to groceries, doctors, and any other essential service. But with so few residents, these ferry lines were becoming economically unsustainable. Tourism saved them. The boats, now often filled with paying visitors, became profitable again. The continued existence of the ferry, which is the very thing that allows the last residents to continue living on the islands, is a direct and tangible benefit of their global fame. The economic support went beyond just transportation. Visitors, moved by the sight of the hundreds of cats and the few dedicated residents caring for them, began to leave donations. Money was collected for cat food, for veterinary supplies, and for general upkeep. On Tashirojima, this support was crucial in the wake of the 2011 tsunami, helping the community rebuild its damaged fishing facilities. The attention also brought organized help. Animal welfare groups and volunteer veterinarians from the mainland began to visit, offering spaying, neutering, and medical checkups that the small, aging population could never have managed on its own. In a very real way, the internet's discovery gave the islands a new purpose. They were no longer just fading fishing villages. They were now living sanctuaries, beloved by a global community that was willing to help support them. But then there is the other edge of the sword. You watch as a well-meaning tourist opens a bag of crackers and throws a handful onto the pier. Immediately, 50 cats surge forward, a frantic, competitive scrum. This scene, repeated dozens of times a day, highlights the core of the problem. The constant supply of food from visitors began to have serious negative consequences. The cats, who once hunted for their food or ate modest scraps from the fishermen, were now being inundated with treats. This led to feline obesity, dental problems from eating soft, unhealthy food, and a host of other health issues. It also changed their behavior, making them more dependent on the tourist handout and less interested in their natural routines. They learned to congregate at the pier just before the ferry arrived, like furry little cargo cultists waiting for the great food ship to appear on the horizon. This gave rise to a peculiar and stressful logistical issue: the cat food crisis. Some tourists, wanting to be extra helpful, would bring enormous bags of kibble, far more than could be eaten in a day. The elderly residents were suddenly saddled with the task of collecting and storing these massive donations, sometimes filling entire abandoned houses with stockpiles of cat food. They had to put up signs, politely asking visitors to stop bringing food and to instead offer monetary donations, which could be used more flexibly for medicine and managed feeding schedules. The strain was not just ecological, it was deeply social. The few remaining residents of these islands were in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. They had lived their entire lives in quiet, close-knit communities. Now their home was a tourist destination. Imagine the stress of having dozens, sometimes hundreds, of strangers wandering through your tiny village every day. Tourists would sometimes trespass on private property to get the perfect photo, peer into the windows of homes, and inadvertently disrupt the peaceful routines of the very people they had come to admire. On Aoshima, the problem was even more acute. With no public restrooms, no trash cans, and no shops, the burden of managing the waste and the needs of the visitors fell entirely on a handful of senior citizens. This is a classic example of what tourism experts call the authenticity paradox. Visitors are drawn to a place because it feels real, untouched, and authentic. But the very act of visiting in large numbers inevitably changes that place, potentially eroding the very authenticity that made it so attractive in the first place. The quiet, melancholic charm of a forgotten island is a fragile thing, and it can easily be shattered by the noise and crush of a crowd. You see the signs of this conflict everywhere. On Tashirojima, near the dock, a large sign is posted with rules for visitors, written in Japanese, English, and other languages. It politely requests that people not feed the cats outside of designated areas, that they take all of their trash back with them to the mainland, and that they respect the privacy of the residents. It's a plea for sustainable, respectful tourism. It's the community's attempt to manage the overwhelming force of its own popularity, to somehow find a balance where the blessings of tourism don't get completely erased by its burdens. Finding that balance is the central challenge of the island's modern existence, a daily struggle to keep their strange, beautiful, and fragile world from being loved to death. The dilemma hangs heavy in the sea air. The islands have been saved from oblivion by tourism, but that very same tourism threatens the health of the cats and the peace of the residents. It's a paradox with no easy solution. As you watch the daily flood of visitors and the resulting chaos, a more fundamental and difficult question begins to form in your mind. Beyond managing the tourists, what about managing the cats themselves? Is it humane to allow a population of hundreds of animals to live in such a dense, artificial environment, completely dependent on human handouts? Is Cat Heaven Island truly a heaven for the cats? The uncomfortable truth is that, without intervention, it would not be. An unchecked feline population, even in a place where they are beloved, is a recipe for disaster. In a closed island ecosystem, their numbers would continue to grow until they outstrip the food supply, even with tourist contributions. This would lead to famine, vicious competition for resources, and the rapid, devastating spread of diseases like feline immunodeficiency virus or feline leukemia. The cat paradise would inevitably collapse into a place of intense suffering. The humans who created this situation, from the first fishermen who brought cats to Aoshima to the modern bloggers who turned them into celebrities, had inadvertently created a serious ethical problem. And in recent years, they have begun to address it with a solution that is both compassionate and controversial: a program of feline governance. The most common and effective form this has taken is known as TNR, Trap Neuter Return. As you walk the lanes of Aoshima or Tashirojima today, you begin to notice a small, telltale sign on many of the cats. One of their ears has a small, clean, straight slice or a V-shaped notch at the very tip. It's not an injury from a fight. It is a brand. It is the universal silent symbol that this cat has been a participant in a TNR program. It is a sign that this particular feline is no longer contributing to the population boom. The process itself is a massive logistical undertaking, driven almost entirely by volunteer groups and charitable donations. It begins with the humane trapping of the cats. Cages with food inside are set up, and once a cat enters, the door gently closes behind it. The trapped cats are then carefully transported to a temporary veterinary clinic, often set up in a borrowed community hall or an empty building on the island. Here, a team of volunteer veterinarians and technicians gets to work. Each cat is anesthetized, given a thorough health check, vaccinated against common diseases, and then surgically spayed for females or neutered for males. This quick, routine procedure ensures they can no longer reproduce. While the cat is under anesthesia, the veterinarian makes that small, painless cut on the ear. This ear tipping is the most important part of the process for the cat's future welfare, as it allows anyone to see from a distance that this animal has already been sterilized, preventing it from being needlessly trapped and put through the stress of the process again. After a short recovery period, the cats are returned to the island and released in the exact location where they were captured. This return part of the process is crucial. The cats are territorial. Removing them permanently would not solve the problem. It would simply create a vacant territory that other, unneutered cats might move into, a phenomenon known as the vacuum effect. By returning the sterilized cat to its own turf, it continues to hold that territory, preventing new, fertile cats from taking over, while no longer producing kittens itself. Animal ethicists and welfare advocates widely regard TNR as the most humane and effective method for managing feral cat populations, though debates continue about its long-term efficacy and the immense resources required to implement it on such a large scale. In 2018, a massive, highly publicized TNR campaign took place on Aoshima. Funded by donations, the non-profit organization Depopulation, or Animal Fund, brought a large team of vets to the island. In just 2 days, they managed to sterilize almost every single cat in the community. It was an incredible feat of logistics and veterinary medicine, a compassionate blitz designed to get the population under control once and for all. You can just imagine the scene. The tiny, quiet island suddenly home to a MASH unit for cats, a quiet army of volunteers working tirelessly to ensure a better, healthier future for the animals in their care. The goal of TNR is not eradication, it is stabilization. The idea is that with no new litters being born, the existing population will gradually and gently decline over time through natural attrition. The cats get to live out their lives in their home, cared for by the residents and admired by visitors, but the unsustainable cycle of growth is broken. It is, in a way, the ultimate expression of the modern human-cat relationship on these islands. Humans started it all by bringing the cats here for their own purposes. Humans fueled the population boom through neglect and then overenthusiasm. And now humans are taking responsibility for managing the consequences, using science and compassion to ensure the story of the cat islands doesn't have a tragic final chapter. It's a bit ironic, really. The descendants of cats originally brought in to breed and solve a mouse problem are now the subjects of a massive effort to stop them from breeding to solve a cat problem. The solution has become the new challenge, and managing it is now the island's most important work. The grand questions of governance, tourism, and history now fade into the background. Having explored the past and the complex present, you allow yourself to simply be. You are here on this small island, for one full rotation of the Earth, to witness the quiet, unscripted rhythm of its daily life. This is the island not as a headline or a case study, but as a home. Your day begins before the sun. You wake in the deep velvety blue of pre-dawn. The only light is the faint, pearlescent glow on the eastern horizon. The air is still and cool, holding the last of the night's chill. It carries the clean elemental scent of salt and damp stone. The island is utterly silent, save for the gentle rhythmic shushing of small waves on the shore. You look out onto the narrow lane and you see them. The cats are quiet shapes, tucked into their chosen sleeping spots. One is a dark lump curled on a doorstep, another a motionless silhouette on a sea wall. They are in a state of deep repose, their boisterous daytime energy stored away. This is the island at its most peaceful, a world holding its breath, waiting for the day to begin. As the sky softens to a pale gray, the first signs of life appear. An elderly man, his back stooped from a lifetime of hard work, emerges from his house. He moves with a slow, deliberate rhythm, a human clockwork synchronized with the coming dawn. He doesn't make a sound, but the cats know. A few heads lift. A tail gives a sleepy twitch. The silent announcement has been made. The human world is stirring. Then you hear it. The first sound to break the stillness is not a bird or a voice, but the faint, distant thrum of an engine. It's the morning ferry, making its way from the mainland. This sound is the island's alarm clock. As it grows steadily louder, the cats begin to stir in earnest. They stretch, arching their backs in long, luxurious curves. They yawn, revealing surprisingly pink mouths and sharp little teeth. They begin their morning ablutions, a meticulous process of grooming. One, a handsome tabby with the clipped ear of a TNR graduate, sits proudly in the middle of the path, washing its face with intense concentration, completely oblivious to the fact that it is blocking the main thoroughfare. The arrival of the ferry is a moment of gentle, predictable chaos. The boat docks and the day's first visitors step ashore, their faces a mixture of awe and excitement at the feline reception awaiting them. The island's energy level ticks up several notches. The cats, now fully awake, engage in their morning ritual of greeting the newcomers, rubbing against legs and purring hopefully. At the same time, the local residents are making their own rounds. An elderly woman places a few bowls of food and fresh water on her porch, and her regular feline patrons, who have been waiting patiently, come to eat. You can see the deep familiarity in these interactions. She murmurs a quiet greeting to a specific calico, who looks up at her with blinking, trusting eyes. Observing this daily rhythm, you understand what is meant by a symbiotic community, where the routines of humans and animals are so deeply intertwined that they are inseparable. By midday, the sun is high and warm. A sleepy torpor settles over the island. The initial excitement of the tourists has mellowed into a quiet exploration. Their chatter, in a half-dozen different languages, provides a soft, burbling soundtrack to the afternoon. The cats, having finished their morning socializing and politicking, have now entered the main business of their day: napping. They are masters of finding the perfect spot. You see them draped over warm car roofs on Tashirojima, which has a few service vehicles, curled in the deep shade of a hydrangea bush, or sprawled out on a sun-baked stone wall, soaking in the heat. Their stillness is infectious. The whole island seems to be taking a long collective siesta. The only sounds are the lapping of the waves, the distant cries of gulls, and the gentle breeze rustling through the leaves of the trees. The afternoon wears on, and a subtle shift in energy occurs. It is signaled once again by the sound of the ferry engine. This time, it is the last boat of the day, preparing to return to the mainland. The day trippers gather at the pier, taking their final photos, giving their final ear scratches. As the ferry pulls away, its horn blasting a farewell, a tangible sense of calm descends. The island is being returned to itself. The brief, daily intrusion of the outside world is over. As dusk begins to settle, painting the sky in soft watercolors, the island exhales. The cats wake from their naps, refreshed and ready for the evening's activities. They become more active, more playful. You might see a pair of young cats chasing each other through an abandoned yard. Their movements a fluid, silent dance. The elderly residents emerge from their homes once again for the evening feeding ritual. The smells of cooked fish and miso soup drift from the houses, mingling with the salt air. The day ends as it began, in a profound quiet. You sit on the seawall, watching the last sliver of sun disappear below the horizon. A friendly cat, its fur soft in the fading light, hops up beside you, not demanding anything, but simply sharing the moment. The sky is now a deep indigo, strewn with a brilliant spray of stars that you can never see from the city. The island is asleep again, its daily cycle complete. You have witnessed its pulse, a slow and steady rhythm set by the tides, the sun, and the rumbling engine of a small, faithful boat. You sit there in the starlit darkness on the seawall, the friendly cat a warm, purring weight beside you. The day is done, and the island is breathing softly in its sleep. You have journeyed through centuries of history, from a cat guarding sacred texts in the hold of a ship, to a shrine built in its honor, to the modern-day realities of tourism and population management. You have seen the entire arc of this peculiar partnership. And now, in the profound quiet of the night, you are left with the final unavoidable question. What happens next? What is the future of these feline isles? The story, you realize, has reached a critical, uncertain point. The elderly residents, the last living link to the island's historical identity, are growing older. The fisherman who can read a storm in a cat's behavior, the woman who knows the name and lineage of every cat that comes to her door, they are a precious and fading generation. A day is coming when the last of them will be gone. A day when there will be no one left on the island who was born there. What happens then? What becomes of this place when its human heart stops beating? You contemplate one possible future. The last resident moves to a care facility on the mainland. The ferry service, with no one to serve, officially stops. The island is handed over entirely to non-profit animal welfare groups. It becomes a true sanctuary, a managed nature preserve for domestic cats. Volunteers arrive on chartered boats a few times a week, bringing food, water, and veterinary supplies. The cats, already sterilized, live out their lives in peace, their health monitored by compassionate outsiders. In this scenario, the island becomes a living monument, a quiet testament to a unique chapter in history. But it will have lost its soul, the daily, lived-in partnership between human and feline. It becomes a museum piece, carefully preserved but no longer alive. Then you consider a second, more melancholic possibility. The last residents go, and the initial wave of support from the outside world begins to fade. The story gets old. The internet, with its famously short attention span, moves on to the next viral sensation. Donations to the volunteer groups dwindle. The logistical challenge of caring for hundreds of animals on a remote island becomes too great. The weekly supply boats become monthly, then stop altogether. The TNR program, which was a compassionate solution, now reveals its poignant irony. A population that cannot reproduce cannot sustain itself. The cats, unable to hunt enough to survive in such numbers and with no new kittens to replace the old, would slowly decline. The island would become a true ghost town, its silence broken only by the wind whistling through the rafters of empty houses. The story would simply end. But perhaps there is a third path. You look up at the brilliant, clear stars and you imagine a different kind of future. The unique character of the island, its incredible story, begins to attract a new kind of resident. Not fishermen or silk farmers, but people actively seeking this strange, quiet life. Perhaps an artist, a writer, or a musician, drawn by the profound peace and the feline companionship. Perhaps a small dedicated group of people who form a new nonprofit and move to the island to run it as a formal, permanent sanctuary, living alongside the cats they care for. In this future, the island is reborn. It doesn't fade into a museum or a ghost town. It reinvents itself. A new community is formed, one based not on a shared past of fishing and silk, but on a shared future dedicated to the welfare of its feline majority. A new 21st century partnership is forged. Urban futurists and policymakers in Japan look at places like Aoshima and Tashirojima not as novelties, but as potential harbingers. They are asking these same difficult questions about what a society's responsibility is to the communities, and even the animals, left behind by massive demographic shifts. There are no easy answers. The future of the Cat Islands is an unwritten page, and its outcome will be a powerful statement about memory, responsibility, and our relationship with the worlds we create and sometimes leave behind. Your journey is at its end. You have traced the cat from a humble worker to a revered deity, to a viral celebrity, and finally, to the quiet, purring ward of a fading community. Their story is a reflection of Japan's own journey through time, a tale of isolation, industry, belief, and the profound, often bittersweet, changes wrought by the modern world. As the first hint of dawn threatens the eastern sky once more, you give the cat beside you one last gentle scratch behind its clipped ear. It's time to leave this strange, magical, and fragile kingdom to its uncertain fate, carrying only the memory of its story with you. And now the story is over. Let the details begin to soften and fade, like footprints on a sandy beach being gently washed away by the tide. The names of the islands, Tashirojima and Aoshima, can drift away. The specific facts about sericulture and the Edo period can blur and dissolve into a soft, indistinct haze. The narrative has done its work and you can let it go. All that remains is the feeling. The deep, peaceful quiet of an island at dusk. Feel the gentle, cool sea breeze on your skin, and the profound stillness that settles when the last ferry has departed for the day. The sharp, clear images of the cats themselves can begin to soften. The bright, curious eyes, the specific patterns of their fur, the little pink noses, let them all merge into a single gentle idea of feline presence. A warm purring weight, a soft, graceful movement in the corner of your eye. There is nothing more you need to learn, nothing you need to remember. Your mind can release its grip on the story and simply float on the calm, quiet sea of your own breath. Imagine that gentle rhythmic sound of the waves we heard earlier, the soft, steady shushing sound as the water laps against the shore. Allow your breathing to find that same, easy rhythm. A slow, gentle inhale, and a long, soft exhale. Let each wave wash away a little bit more of the day. Any lingering thoughts, any small worries. Just let them be carried out to sea on the tide, growing smaller and smaller until they disappear over the horizon. There is only the sound of the waves, the coolness of the air, and the feeling of deep, comfortable rest. The island is now asleep. The cats are curled in their chosen spots, dreaming their own silent, unknowable dreams. The last of the elderly residents are safe in their beds. The stars will slowly overhead in the deep dark sky. The entire world of the story is at peace, and it is inviting you to join it in that peace. You don't need to follow the path anymore. You don't need to watch the ferry. You are already there, in a place of perfect tranquility. A place where it is safe to let go completely, to allow your body to grow heavy and warm, to allow your mind to drift and wander into the soft, welcoming darkness of a deep and restful sleep. Let the story be a gentle anchor, holding you in this calm place, as you drift and fall asleep.